Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, today we begin the 10th topic of this saga of revisiting the collection and transmission history of the Qur'an. And this 10th topic actually relates to narratives which record the fact that when in the times of the Caliph Uthman, anhu, the masahif had been copied and had been brought over before him, he is reported to have said that there are certain mistakes in these copied masahif. The word he used was lahn. And he further went on to say, as is reported by these narratives, that there's no need to correct these errors, and the Arabs will correct them by their tongues. When they read them, they'll correct them. So we will examine these narratives, and these narratives have been reported by various individuals. We'll see how these variants stand to the test of historical criticism. And besides this remark by Uthman, we also have narratives attributed to Aisha, anha, Sayyid ibn Jubayr, and Aban ibn Uthman, who on a different note also attribute scribal errors to the Qur'an. So we will look at all these narratives, but perhaps in this session we shall take up the narrative in which Uthman is reported to have said that he sees errors in the Qur'an which have been presented before him as copies, and there's no need to correct them. So let me read out a representative text before you, and this text has been recorded by Abu Ubaid in his Fazail al-Qur'an, and it is reported by Ikrama, and the words are: An Ikrama قال لما كتبت المصاحف أرزت على عثمان فوجد فيها حروفا من اللحن فقال لا تغيروها فإن العرب ستغيرها أو قال ستعربها بألسنتها لو كان الكاتب من سقيف والمملي من هزيل لم توجد هذه الحروف. So, narrated from Ikrama, when the masahif had been written, they were presented before Uthman. He found some errors and said, "Do not change them, for the Arabs will soon change them," or said, "They will correctly pronounce them by their tongues." And had the scribe been from the Saqif tribe, and the one who dictates from the Huzail tribe, these letters would not have been found in it. So this is a representative text of this narrative. Now, this narrative has been called into question and criticism by our various past authorities, and they think that this narrative is something which cannot be accepted. Thus, for example, we find authorities like Ibn al-Ambari, as is recorded by Suyuti and Adani, they say that it is highly improbable that a person of the caliber of Uthman and eminence of Uthman, who had actually deputed people to remove errors and to remove differences in reading, he would tolerate differences when the copies would have made and come up to him. And the question is that if he was not going to rectify these mistakes for which he had actually deputed people, who else after them would rectify these mistakes? So this is what has been posited by Dani and by Suyuti, and Suyuti is actually recording the opinion of Ibn al-Ambari. Now, there are some more criticisms as well, and in particular by Ibn Taymiyyah. So Dr. Abdus Subhan, who has edited the version of Kitab al-Masahif, he has cited criticism by Ibn Taymiyyah in this regard as well. And the first of these is, and in order and enumeration, this is the second critique on the narrative, is that Ibn Taymiyyah says that Arabs would regard lahn to be a very despicable thing in their own poetry and in their own discourses. So how would they have tolerated this lahn in the Qur'an? So this is something which is highly improbable. And similarly, Ibn Taymiyyah, and the third point of this critique is, he says that the words of Uthman are, Arabs will correct it. He says that these are absolutely inappropriate because it is known that it is not just the Arabs who are going to read the Qur'an, there will be non-Arabs as well. So therefore, this excuse or this pretext which is being given is not correct, because it's not just the Arabs who are going to read the Qur'an. If non-Arabs are going to read the Qur'an, how are they going to correct it? Then the fourth point of criticism, this is also recorded by Ibn Taymiyyah and has been pointed out by Dr. Abdus Subhan in his edited version of Ibn Abi Dawud's Kitab al-Masahif. He says that there are several instances recorded in history in which we find that if a script was wrongly written or a word was wrongly written, the companions would have it corrected. He cites the fact that in the times of the Caliph Uthman, when the word tabuh was written instead of tabut, Uthman had it corrected because he said that the dialect of the Quraysh has to be followed, in the matters of writing the script of a word, so he had it corrected. And similarly, he cites another narrative in which we find that such a correction had been made, and I'm going to cite that narrative as well before you. And this narrative has been recorded by Abu Ubaid in his Fazail al-Qur'an, and it is recorded by Hani al-Barbari, who was a Mawla of Uthman. So he says, قال كنت عند عثمان وهم يعرضون المصاحف فأرسلني بكتف شاة إلى أبي بن كعب فيها لم يتسنى وفيها لا تبديل للخلق وفيها فأمهل الكافرين قال فدعا بالدوات فمها إحدى اللامين وكتب لخلق الله ومها فأمهل وكتب فمهل وكتب لم يتسنى الحق فيها الها الحق فيه الها. So he وكتب لم يتسنى الحق فيه الها. The words are, the translation is, Hani al-Barbari, Mawla of Uthman, said, I was with Uthman when the people were presenting the masahif. He sent me to Ubay, and he sent me to Ubay with the shoulder bone of a goat on which it was written, Lam yatasanna, and La tabdila lil khalq, and Fa'amhil al kafirin. So he called for ink and deleted one of the two lams and wrote La tabdila lil khalq, and deleted Fa'amhil and wrote for mahil and wrote lam yatasanna by appending a ha to it. So he says that in the presence of this data, in which we find companions being very diligent in correcting wrongly written words, how can it be tolerated that Uthman would have, when he himself had this correction made, how could he have tolerated the other corrections or other errors which were found in the masahif, in which were presented before him, and about which he had remarked that there are errors in them. So he says that this is highly improbable. Now, another point of criticism is that, and this has been presented by Suyuti in his Al-Itqan, he says that how would the companions had tolerated this error from the Qur'an, which they had been given or transferred by the Prophet himself, and would have unanimously accepted this error. It is highly improbable that all of these companions would have been transferred or given these masahif or transferred these masahif, and they would have become unanimous in tolerating errors in the Quran. This is highly improbable. The sixth point, and this is of critique, and this is also put up by Suyuti, he says that Uthman had made several masahif. It's not just one masahif that he had copied. It is reported it was 5 or 6 or 7 or 4. There are different opinions in this regard. And he says that it is highly improbable that all these masahif would have had these errors. And if this is improbable, then of course should we consider that only 2 or 3 or 1 or 2 would have these errors? And had this been the case, that there are a couple of masahif who were wrongly written, then this should have been reported in history, that there are a certain number of masahif or such and such mushaf was not wrongly, or had some errors in it. And he says that we find no such report in history, which is a question mark on this whole episode. The seventh criticism, and this is put forward by Ali Qurani al-Amili in his Tadween al-Qur'an, he says that had Uthman tolerated these errors, it would have become a perfect excuse for his opponents who were against his act of unifying the Qur'an to put forward this excuse and say that he's a person who's someone who is fond of unifying the reading of the Ummah, would like to unify the reading of the Ummah, but he is still tolerating these errors. So this would have become a perfect pretext for his adversaries to raise this point, but they never did, which in his opinion shows that perhaps this never happened. And finally, viewers, the eighth point of criticism on the text of this narrative is, and this has been presented by Abdul Fattah al-Shalbi, and he in his Rasmul Musaf al-Usmani, the book, he says that there is a contradiction in the narrative, because there is a narrative which says in the beginning that there are errors, and in the end we have a variant which says, in which the words of Uthman are قَدْ أَحْسَنْتُمْ وَأَجْمَلْتُمْ, which means that you have done a good and a befitting job. So he says, on the one hand, he's saying that there are errors, and the end of the variant which is recorded says that قَدْ أَحْسَنْتُمْ وَأَجْمَلْتُمْ, that you have done a lovely and a beautiful job in copying out this masahif. So again, this is how he says that how could have Uthman said two extremely opposite statements in a single sentence. Now, viewers, this is as far as the critique on the text of the narrative is concerned. I will now come to the chain of narration of this narrative, as has been criticized or critically evaluated by some of our previous authorities. And I'd like here to present before you the critique of Al-Baqillani in this regards, specifically and specially. And he says that an analysis of this narrative shows that there are three people who report this narrative, and he analyzes each of them separately. So there are narratives from Qatada ibn Di'ama, then there are narratives from Ikrama, and then there are narratives from Abdul Ala ibn Abdullah. And he says that all these three narratives have to be separately analyzed. And viewers, you can see on the screen before you, there are three chains of narrations which are being displayed, and each of these chains are the ones which Baqillani has cited, and he says that these are the musnad narratives. He also has criticized the mursal narratives, which are other than these, and of course his criticism would be that these are mursal, and the fact that they are mursal in itself is enough criticism. So viewers, now I'm going to present the critique of Al-Baqillani on these three chains of narration, which you are viewing before yourselves on the screen. And these chains of narration have been recorded, as I said, by Baqillani, and they are recorded by Ibn Mujahid. And he has actually pointed out discrepancies in these chains of narrations. And the discrepancy that he's pointed out, which you can see are being indicated by the arrows on the screen, are that in the first of these, which to be exact is the third one, Qatada narrates from Yahya ibn Ya'mar without mentioning Nasr ibn Asim. And in others, which are the first and second ones, we find that Qatada narrates from Yahya through Nasr ibn Asim. So this is the first contradiction that he points out. The second contradiction that he points out is that in the second of them, the person who narrates from Yahya ibn Ya'mar is Ibn Abi Futayma. And in the third, it is Yahya ibn Ya'mar who narrates from Ibn Futayma. The third contradiction that he points out is that in the second, the name Ibn Abi Futayma is mentioned, and in the first and third, it is Ibn Futayma, showing that Ibn Abi Futayma is a little known person, because the narrator or people do not know whether he is Ibn Futayma or Ibn Abi Futayma. So this is the criticism which Baqillani has posited. Viewers, on the other hand, Ad-Dani says that these musnad narratives are also mursal because Yahya ibn Ya'mar never met Uthman. So this is the second critique on these chains of narration. So I have described Baqillani's critique, who basically has pointed out discrepancies in the chains of narration. And Dani, on the other hand, says explicitly that even these musnad narratives are mursal because Yahya ibn Ya'mar never met Uthman. So viewers, this is how our previous authorities have criticized the narratives of Qatada. Now, in my own personal opinion, when I gathered all the material on these variants, I found that this whole critique is wanting because, as I said, we first of all need to realize that the musnad and the mursal narratives themselves have further things that need to be pointed out. Now, let me first go on to the mursal narratives, which obviously can be dismissed because they are mursal in themselves. But besides being mursal in themselves, there are further flaws as well. So you can see, viewers, the mursal versions of, or the mursal variants of this narrative being displayed before you by Qatada, reported by Qatada. And if you can see that in Ibn Abi Dawud's chain, there are unknown persons. So the words are ashabuna. The words you can clearly see on the screen is ashabuna, between Bakr and Abu Amr. Moreover, Bakr ibn Bakkar himself is suspect. While some authorities have regarded him to be trustworthy, Ibn Abi Hatim records that according to his father Abu Hatim, he is laysa bil qawi, and according to Yahya ibn Ma'in, he is laysa bi shay. According to An-Nisai, he is laysa bi siqa. Ibn Hajar in his Tahzib al-Tahzib records that Al-Uqayli, As-Saji, and Ibn al-Jarud have regarded him to be among the Zurafa. So this is how we find jar on Bakr ibn Bakkar. Now, in the chain, which is you can see on your screens, which is recorded by Al-Baqillani, there are two narrators, Shababa ibn Sawwar and Sulaiman ibn Khallad, who are regarded to be reliable by some authorities, but some others do not. And I'm not going to point out those authorities. Thus, about Shababa ibn Sawwar is regarded to be Saduq, yuktabu hadithuhu wala yuhtajju bihi by Abu Hatim. And according to Ibn Kharash, as recorded by Al-Mizzi, Ahmed ibn Hanbal was not happy with him. Now, as far as Sulaiman ibn Khallad is concerned, he is Saduq in the opinion of Abu Hatim, and Abu Ja'far al-Makfuf, which you can also see, viewers, is being displayed, his name is being displayed on the screen before you. He is a majhul person, he is an unknown person. So this is as far as my additional criticism is concerned on the mursal narratives of Qatada. Now, viewers, I'd like to also add something to the musnad version of these narratives. And first of all, you can see the musnad version being displayed before you on your screens. It has all the variants, and you can clearly see, if you view all these variants, that the critique of al-Baqilani is actually deficient. It does not take into account all the chains of narration from Yahya ibn Ya'mar. He has only taken those chains of narration which Ibn Mujahid has recorded. And I also think that his points of contradiction are a little harsh, because a sympathetic analysis shows that in all probability, the third narrative referred to by al-Baqilani also has the same chain of narration from Yahya till Abu Dawud, and that perhaps the narrator has mixed up the name. So therefore, I have revealed this in the chart as well, and disregarded the fact that whether it was Abu Futhayma or Ibn Abi Futhayma, because in all probability it was Abdullah ibn Futhayma. In this regard, I think the real critique is that the chain of narration has certain other flaws. And the first of these flaws is that this musnad chain itself is mursal, which has already been pointed out by Dani, because Yahya ibn Ya'mar has not met Uthman. And this has been further corroborated according to Al-Bukhari in his Tarikh al-Kabir. He says that the chain Qatada to Nasr ibn Asim to Abdullah ibn Futhayma to Yahya ibn Ya'mar is munqata, is broken. So this has been clearly pointed out by Al-Bukhari in his Tarikh al-Kabir. So I would say the real criticism on these variants of musnad variants of Qatada is that they themselves are mursal, as has already been pointed out by Dani and has been further substantiated by Al-Bukhari, which I just cited in reference to his Tarikh al-Kabir. Now, the second point of criticism on this is that these narratives, viewers, as you can see on your screen, also have Qatada. All these narratives have the person of Qatada, and Qatada is a person who is famous for his tadlis, and all his narratives are mu'an'an. They have his an'ana. So this is another weakness in all these variants. Now, viewers, you can also see a person by the name of Imran ibn Dawr al-Qattan. He is the person who reports from Qatada. Now, he is someone who is regarded to be suspect. So Al-Uqayli records that in the opinion of Yahya ibn Ma'in, Imran ibn Dawr al-Qattan is Zarif, and Ahmed ibn Hanbal says that he is hopeful that he may be Salih al-Hadith. According to An-Nisai also, he is Zarif. Ibn Hajar records that he is Saduq and is forgetful. Al-Mizzi records that Abbas al-Duri reports from Yahya ibn Ma'in that he is Laysa bil Qawi, and at another place Yahya has said that he is nothing. Laysa huwa bishay. That Yahya ibn Sa'id ibn Qattan did not consider him worthy of being narrated from. Similarly, at one instance, Abu Dawud as-Sajistani has called him Zaif, and at another he says that he has not heard anything bad about him. So these are the opinions of various authorities regarding Imran ibn Dawr al-Qattan. And viewers, if you remember, the second of these narratives has been, the second person who reports these narratives is Ikrama at-Tai, which I had already introduced you before I began this analysis. Now, as far as Ikrama at-Tai is concerned, our existing people of the past who have criticized his narratives is that there is no information about who this person was. Adani in particular says that he is a person who never met Uthman, and that he is Rijal books do not give any information about who this person was, and Dani says that he is a person who never heard from Uthman. Now, I'd like to add to this criticism regarding Dani's criticism that he never met Uthman. If you can see the following chain of narration being displayed, or the chain of narration of Ikrama at-Tai being displayed before you on the screen. So, viewers, you can see, as far as Dani is concerned, he has already regarded this narrative to be mursal because he thinks that Ikrama never met Uthman. But other than that. And furthermore, you can also see the person of Zubayr ibn Khirrith. Now, although many people have regarded Zubayr ibn Khirrith to be trustworthy, Al-Mawrid records that Ali ibn al-Madini said that Shoba had forsaken him and did not narrate from him. It may further be noted that since there is no information about Ikramah at-Tai, and if he is assumed to be Ikramah Mawla of Ibn Abbas, then it is also known that Ikramah Mawla ibn Abbas could never have met or heard from Uthman, because Ikramah Mawla ibn Abbas died in 107 Hijrah. So again, this makes further problematic reading of the variance of this narrative. Viewers, now we come to the third person who notes, reports these variants, and he is Abdul Ala ibn Abdullah, whom I have already introduced you. So regarding his variance, the existing criticism that I have noted down from various authorities is that Dr. Abdul Subhan refers to Ibn Hajar, who says that Abdul Ala ibn Abdullah ibn Amr al-Qurashi belonged to the fifth tabaqa, which is that of the young followers. And the fact is that some of them did not hear from the companions. So this is what his critique is. Now, Ibn al-Ambari, as recorded by Suyuti, while making a comprehensive statement on the chain of narration of all the narratives attributed to Uthman, says that they are munqata in this regard. These particular narratives which are attributed to Uthman. So this is as far as the existing criticism is concerned. I'd like to add some more points to this existing criticism, and if you can see the chart being displayed before you, in which Abdul Ala ibn Abdullah is reporting these narratives, you can see a person by the name of Al-Haris ibn Abdir Rahman, indicated by the arrow. So in these variants, Al-Haris ibn Abdir Rahman is regarded to be weak by some authorities. Abu Hatim says, وَلَيْسَ بِزَاقِ الْقَوِي يُكْتَبُ حَدِيثُهُ. Ibn Hazm, as recorded by Mizan al-I'tidal, Zahabi's Mizan al-I'tidal, he says that he is Zarif, and Ibn Hajar says that he is Saduq and is forgetful. So this is as far as the variants are concerned. So viewers, you can clearly see that as far as the chains of narration are concerned, they have been narrated by, reported by three people, Qatada ibn Di'ama, then we have Ikramah at-Tai, and then we have the third person, which I just said, was Abdul Ala ibn Abdullah ibn Amr al-Qurashi. So all these three chains of narration have their weaknesses. Earlier on, we have already seen some of very weighty points which have been regarded and raised by our worthy authorities, which make this narrative absolutely suspect. Now, also let me in my last couple of minutes also sum up that there are some people who have tried to make sense of these narratives, and they think that although they are wrongly or badly reported by narrators, there could be some element of truth in them, and they have also tried to justify or interpret this narrative. Thus, for example, we find Ibn Ashta, and his opinion has been recorded by Suyuti in his Al-Itqan. So Ibn Ashta says that perhaps what happened was that when Uthman looked at the copied masahif which were brought before him, he found certain words which were written in some other dialect, not that of the Quraysh. For example, the word tabu, as we all know, was the word that was corrected by Uthman. So he says that perhaps Uthman saw certain words which were written in some other dialect, and which he said that he will resolve them, and then he had also corrected them. But Ibn Ashta says that perhaps the narrators mixed up this whole issue, and instead of recording that when Uthman saw these errors of script, and that in particular being the script being non-Qurashi, he actually corrected that. But the narrators, instead of recording this correction, they mixed up the words and said that Uthman still said that there are errors. So this is how Ibn Ashta has explained these narratives. Now, another interpretation in this regard has been put forward by Al-Baqilani, and he says that in the script of certain words, you can easily see that there could have been certain words which are written in a certain manner, in which perhaps a word or letter could have been missing. He has presented some other explanations as well, but the one that I could find the most cogent was that he gave this example, as you can see on the screen, that the word Ismail and Ishaq, as you can see, can be written with an alif. And in the second script, you can also see, the second version, you can also see that Ismail and Ishaq were written without an alif, and obviously the script itself accommodates this alif. So perhaps it was while viewing such words in which certain letters were, although they were not pronounced, although they were not written, but they were understood and they were pronounced. So perhaps he was referring to such words. So this is one of the more plausible explanations which Baqillani has put forward. And finally, viewers, Dani has also posited interpretation in spite of criticizing these narratives. He says perhaps some of the areas or some of the scribal errors which are found in the Quran, in which either a alif or a vav or a ya was accidentally put extra in certain words, as you can see on the screen before you. Thus, for example, we find wala awza'u in Surah Tawbah, then we find la uzabbihannahu, in which you can see the letter alif is additional. We have an additional alif after la. Then we have this example of sa'urikum and ar-riba, in which you can see a vav is additional. Then we have example of min naba'il mursaleen. This is Surah Anam, and you can see the letter ya is additional here. So he actually says that there are certain letters in the Quran, certain words in the Quran, in which either an alif or a vav or a ya is additional in those words, and perhaps it is towards these additional letters which Uthman was pointing to and saying that the Arabs, since they knew that although the script was wrongly written, but they knew the exact word themselves, so therefore they would correct it from their pronunciation. And those who would come after them, who would perhaps not be knowing how these words were to be correctly pronounced, since they would be taking the recitation from the Arabs themselves, so the Arabs would make them correct these wrong letters the way they are recorded in the script, and they would have passed on this information that these are extra letters and the actual pronunciation is such and such. So this is how Dani in his Al-Muqni has tried to justify these narratives or interpret them. So viewers, in this talk I come to the end of this episode, and we have discussed the narrative which is attributed to Uthman in this regard, in which he said that when he saw the copies of the Quran that there are errors or mistakes, and the exact word is lahn. And we have seen how certain questions arise on the text of this narrative, and we have also seen how questions arise on the variants or the chain of narration of these narratives. And finally, we've also seen certain of our authorities trying to make sense of these narratives. In the next episode, inshallah, we will take a look on some of the other narratives which are similar in their purport, and then inshallah we'll sum up and bring ourselves to an overall conclusion regarding all these narratives. Until then, أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.